Marcus Reyes wiped the grease from his hands and stared at the message on his screen for the third time that morning, wondering if he had read it wrong. But the words remained the same no matter how many times his eyes passed over them. His grandmother was dead. He leaned back against the cold metal wall of his workshop at the Ceres Orbital Shipyard, where he had spent the last 15 years of his life fixing starship engines and earning a reputation as the mechanic who could bring any machine back to life. And he tried to feel something about this news, but the truth was that Alina Reyes had been a stranger to him for most of his adult life. The last time he had seen her, he was 7 years old, standing in the doorway of her strange home in the Carpathian Mountains on Earth, watching her wave goodbye with those sharp eyes that seemed to see right through him. And then his parents had taken him away, and they never went back, and the years had turned that memory into something foggy and uncertain. Now she was gone, and she had left him everything. The inheritance notice explained that Alina had owned a property the locals called the Dome, a curved metallic structure built against the side of a mountain in a remote region where few people lived, and Marcus had inherited all of it along with whatever secrets it contained. His first instinct was to refuse, to let some government agency deal with the property and its contents, because what did he need with an old building on a planet he barely remembered? But something stopped him. A memory surfaced from the depths of his mind, unclear and broken like a dream half forgotten upon waking. And in this memory he was very small, and he was hiding behind a door in his grandmother's home, listening to her speak in a language he did not understand, her voice soft and urgent as if she was comforting someone who was afraid. He had always assumed it was a dream, but now he was not so sure. Marcus requested leave from the shipyard, and his supervisor granted it without question, because Marcus had not taken a single day off in 3 years, and within a week he was on a transport heading for Earth, watching the blue planet grow larger through the viewport and feeling like a stranger returning to a home that had never really been his. The journey to the Carpathian Mountains took another 2 days by ground transport, and the deeper he traveled into the wilderness, the more he understood why his grandmother had chosen this place, because it was beautiful and lonely and far from the eyes of anyone who might ask questions. The village at the base of the mountain was small and old, with buildings made of stone and wood that looked like they had stood for centuries, and when Marcus asked for directions to the dome, the locals grew quiet and their faces became guarded. "The witch's house," an old woman whispered, making a sign with her hand that Marcus did not recognize. "You should not go there, young man, that place is cursed." Marcus thanked her and went anyway. The path up the mountain was overgrown and difficult, and by the time he reached his destination, the sun was beginning to set behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley below, and there before him stood the dome. It was larger than he expected, a curved structure of dull gray metal that seemed to grow out of the mountainside itself, and its surface was weathered and scarred by decades of harsh weather. But Marcus could see immediately that this was no ordinary building, because the design was too smooth, too precise, too advanced for anything that should exist in this remote place. He approached the entrance and found a panel beside the door, and when he pressed his palm against it as the inheritance documents had instructed, the panel glowed blue and the door slid open with a soft hiss that spoke of machinery still functioning after all these years. Inside he found a home. The main room was modest and warm, filled with books and dried herbs and handwritten journals stacked on every surface, and it smelled like lavender and old paper and something else, something faintly metallic that tickled the back of his throat. Marcus spent hours exploring the space, reading fragments of his grandmother's journals and trying to understand the woman who had lived here alone for so long, and what he found only deepened the mystery. Because Alina had been brilliant, a biomedical researcher who had abandoned a promising career to retreat to this mountain, and her notes were filled with references to things he did not understand, to visitors and promises, and a duty that she could never abandon. It was nearly midnight when he found the door. It was hidden behind a bookshelf in the back room, and Marcus only discovered it because he noticed that the floor was worn in a pattern that suggested the shelf had been moved many times over the years. And when he pushed the heavy wooden frame aside, his breath caught in his throat. The door was made of a material he had never seen before, smooth and dark, and faintly iridescent like the shell of some deep-sea creature, and it was covered in symbols that hurt his eyes to look at, symbols that seemed to shift and change when he was not looking directly at them. This was not human engineering. Marcus had spent 15 years working on starships from dozens of different civilizations, and he knew alien technology when he saw it, and this door was unlike anything in the catalogs of known species, unlike anything humanity had ever encountered in its expansion across the stars. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch the surface, and it was warm beneath his fingers, alive in a way that metal should not be, and somewhere deep in the mountain, he heard a sound like breathing, slow and rhythmic and patient. His grandmother had been hiding something, something impossible, something that had waited in this mountain for decades, and now Marcus understood why she had left everything to him, why the inheritance had come with a biometric lock that only he could open. She had been waiting for him to come home. She had been waiting for him to discover the truth. And as Marcus stood before that alien door with his heart pounding in his chest, he knew that his life would never be the same again, because whatever lay beyond this threshold had been calling to him since he was a child, calling him back to this mountain, calling him to finish whatever his grandmother had started so many years ago. He took a deep breath and began to examine the door's locking mechanism, because that was what he did, that was who he was, and no lock had ever stopped Marcus Reyes for long. The dome had chosen its heir, and the heir had finally come home. 3 days passed before Marcus finally understood how to open the door. He did not hack it or force it or trick it, because that was not how machines worked, and Marcus had learned long ago that every machine wanted to function, wanted to do the job it was built for, and the secret to fixing anything was finding what was stopping it from doing what it wanted to do. The door wanted to open, but something was broken inside it. He traced the power lines that ran through the walls, following them with his fingers and his ears and his instincts, until he found a small panel hidden behind a loose stone in the floor, and inside that panel was a coupling that connected the door to its power source, and that coupling was damaged, corroded by decades of moisture seeping through the mountain rock. Marcus repaired it with materials from his travel kit, soldering the connection with steady hands while his mind raced with questions about what could possibly lie beyond this threshold. And when the repair was complete, he heard a deep humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The door recognized him. It slid open without a sound, and cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond, air that tasted of ice and something else, something alive and ancient and waiting. Marcus stepped through. The chamber beyond was vast, carved into the heart of the mountain itself, and the ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into shadow, and the walls were lined with lights that glowed with a soft blue radiance that reminded Marcus of bioluminescent creatures he had once seen in a documentary about Earth's deep oceans. But it was what stood in the center of the chamber that stopped his breath. Arranged in concentric circles like the rings of some vast tree, stood 47 stasis pods, each one taller than a man and made of the same dark iridescent material as the door, and through the transparent panels on each pod, Marcus could see the beings inside. They were not human. They were tall and slender, with skin that seemed to glow faintly from within, shifting through colors like light passing through a prism, and their features were delicate and strange. With large eyes that remained closed in the sleep of stasis, and long fingers that ended in something between nails and crystal. Marcus had never seen anything like them in any database, any record, any catalog of known alien species. They were something new, something unknown, something that had been hidden in this mountain while humanity spread across the stars, never knowing they were here. He walked among the pods in a daze, counting them, examining the machinery that kept them alive, and his mechanic's mind was already cataloging problems, noting the warning lights that blinked on several consoles, hearing the uneven hum of power systems that were failing after too many years of operation. These beings were dying slowly, their stasis pods breaking down one component at a time. Marcus returned to his grandmother's home and tore through her journals with desperate energy, searching for answers, and he found them in a leather-bound book hidden beneath a loose floorboard, written in his grandmother's careful handwriting. 60 years ago, a ship had crashed in these mountains. Elena had been young then, a brilliant researcher who had come to this remote place to escape the pressures of her career and find peace in solitude. And instead she had found something impossible, a vessel of unknown origin burning in a crater on the mountainside, and inside that vessel, survivors. They called themselves the Velkari, and they were the last of their kind. Their civilization had been ancient when humanity was still learning to make fire, spanning hundreds of worlds and countless generations, but a great war had consumed everything. A genocidal conflict that had burned their planets and scattered their people until only this small group remained, fleeing across the void in a damaged ship, searching for somewhere safe to hide. Elena could have reported them, could have called the authorities, and handed these strange beings over to scientists who would study them and governments who would use them. But she looked into their frightened eyes and saw not aliens, but refugees, not specimens, but people. And she made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She hid them. She learned their language over months of careful communication, studied their technology enough to keep the stasis pods running, and built the dome around the entrance to their chamber, transforming herself into a guardian who would protect them while they slept and waited for a time when it would be safe to wake. The Velkari had a prophecy, Elena wrote, a belief passed down through generations that spoke of the mender, one who would come when the long sleep ended to help them rebuild what was lost. And Elena had believed with all her heart that this prophecy spoke of her grandson, the boy with clever hands who could fix anything, the child she had watched take apart machines before he could read. She had been waiting for Marcus to grow up. She had been waiting for him to become the person the Velkari needed. And now she was gone, and the stasis systems were failing, and Marcus stood alone in a chamber full of dying refugees with nothing but his tools and his skills, and the weight of his grandmother's faith pressing down on his shoulders. He did not know if he was the mender from their prophecy. He did not know if he could save them. But he knew he had to try, because that was what his grandmother had done for 60 years, alone, without thanks, without recognition. And if one woman could carry this burden for so long, then surely he could carry it now. Marcus returned to the chamber and began to work. He examined every pod, every system, every connection, mapping out the failures and prioritizing the repairs, and his hands moved with the confidence born of 15 years of practice, the muscle memory of 1,000 engines and 1,000 machines that had been broken and needed to be made whole again. He would wake the Velkari when the systems were stable. He would tell them that Elena was gone, but that her grandson had come to finish what she started. And he would find a way to save them, because that was what mechanics did, that was what his grandmother had done, and Marcus Reyes had never met a machine he could not fix. The blue lights of the chamber glowed around him as he worked through the night, and somewhere in the darkness, the Velkari dreamed their ancient dreams, unaware that their mender had finally arrived. Marcus woke the first group of Velkari on a cold morning 2 weeks after he had discovered the chamber, choosing the 5 whose pods showed the most critical failures, knowing that they would die within days if he did not act. The awakening process was slow and delicate, and Marcus monitored every vital sign with equipment he had built from spare parts and jury-rigged sensors, and when the first pod opened with a soft hiss of escaping air, he found himself holding his breath. Her name was Thessaly, and she was old, so old that even the other Velkari regarded her with reverence. And when her eyes opened, they glowed with a light that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her being, shifting through colors that Marcus had no names for. She looked at him and spoke in a language that sounded like music and water and wind through crystal caves, and Marcus did not understand the words, but he understood the question in her eyes. "Elena is gone," he said softly, and he did not need to explain more, because Thessaly read the truth in his face, and a sound escaped her that needed no translation, a sound of grief that echoed through the chamber and woke the others from their long sleep. They mourned together, these ancient beings and the human mechanic who had inherited their guardian's duty, and when the mourning was done, Thessaly touched Marcus's forehead with her long fingers and something passed between them, a connection that allowed understanding to flow where language could not reach. She told him the story of her people, of the civilization they had built across the stars, of the art and music and science they had created over thousands of generations, and of the enemy that had risen from the void to destroy everything they loved, hunting them from world to world, until only this small group remained. They had come to Earth because their damaged ship could go no further, and Elena had found them and saved them, and they had slept in hope that someday the universe would be safe again. Marcus told her that he did not know if the universe was safe, but he knew that the stasis pods were failing, and if they did not find a solution, the last of the Velkari would die in this mountain chamber. Thessaly smiled, and it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who had accepted the end long ago. But Marcus had not accepted anything. He threw himself into the work with a fury that surprised even him, repairing pods and stabilizing systems, and waking more Velkari in small groups as their chambers became unsafe. And the ancient beings watched him with wonder as he performed miracles with nothing but scraps and determination. Their engineers had always worked in perfect conditions, with precise tools and controlled environments, but this human crawled through access tunnels and welded incompatible metals together, and found solutions that their greatest minds had never imagined. And when he failed, he simply tried again, and again, and again, until the machine surrendered and did what he needed it to do. "You are strange," one of the younger Velkari told him, watching Marcus repair a power coupling with a piece of wire and a prayer. "Your species is so young, so chaotic, but there is something in you that burns, something that refuses to accept defeat." Marcus just shrugged and kept working, because there was no time for philosophy when people were dying. But the Dominion had time. The Dominion was a conglomerate of corporations and governments that controlled vast regions of space, and they had been searching for the Velkari for decades, ever since they learned of the biotechnology that the ancient species had developed, secrets that could make them rich beyond imagination, and they had spies everywhere, watching for any sign of their quarry. Someone in the village had noticed the strange activity at the dome, had seen Marcus coming and going, had heard sounds from the mountain that should not exist, and that someone had sent a message to the wrong people. Marcus was in the chamber when the transmission came through on his personal communicator, a message from Earth's government informing him that ships from the Dominion had entered orbit and were demanding the surrender of the alien fugitives known to be hidden in the Carpathian Mountains. He had 72 hours to comply, or the Dominion would come and take them by force. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he read the message, and when he told the Velkari what had happened. He saw fear in their eyes for the first time, a fear that went deeper than death, a fear of what the Dominion would do to them if they were captured. "We should surrender," Thessaly said quietly, her voice heavy with resignation. "We have run for so long, hidden for so long, perhaps it is time to accept what cannot be changed." The other Velkari nodded, their culture of peace leaving them unable to imagine any other path, and Marcus looked at them and felt something rising in his chest, something hot and fierce and utterly human. "No," he said, and his voice echoed through the chamber with a force that made the Velkari turn and stare. "My grandmother gave 60 years of her life to protect you. She died keeping your secret, and I will not let that sacrifice mean nothing." "What can you do?" Thessaly asked, her eyes searching his face for an answer she could not imagine. "You are one human, and the Dominion has ships and soldiers and weapons beyond counting." Marcus thought of the shipyard where he had worked for 15 years, of the friends he had made there, the debts that were owed and the favors that were waiting, and a plan began to form in his mind. A desperate, impossible plan that had no right to work. "I know people," he said. "People who owe me, people who hate the Dominion, people who would do anything if I asked them, and I have 72 hours to call in every favor I have ever earned." He looked at the Velkari, at their frightened faces and their fragile bodies, and he made a promise that he did not know if he could keep. "I am going to get you out of here," he said. "Every single one of you, I swear it on my grandmother's memory." And then Marcus Reyes went to war. Marcus worked the communications console through the night, reaching out across the void to every contact he had made in 15 years of fixing ships and helping people who had nowhere else to turn. He called Chen Wei, a cargo hauler who had crashed on an asteroid 3 years ago and would have died if Marcus had not rebuilt his life support system from nothing but scrap metal and hope. He called the Okonkwo sisters, twin smugglers who ran supplies to colonies that the Dominion had blockaded, women who had lost their mother to Dominion prisons, and who would do anything to strike back at their enemy. He called Johara Nasir, a pilot who had been one of the best in the fleet until she punched a Dominion official for insulting her crew, a woman who now flew garbage transports and dreamed of the stars she could no longer reach. One by one, they answered, and one by one, they agreed to help, not because Marcus begged them, but because he had helped them when no one else would, and they remembered. "You are asking us to go against the Dominion," Chen Wei said, his voice crackling through the communicator. "You know what they will do to us if we are caught." "I know," Marcus replied, "but I am not asking you to fight. I am asking you to fly, to carry passengers to safety while I create a distraction, and then to disappear into the void where they cannot follow." "And what about you?" Johara asked, her voice sharp with concern. "What happens to you when the Dominion comes?" Marcus did not answer that question. Within 48 hours, 7 ships had gathered in orbit around Earth, vessels so old and battered that the Dominion patrols did not even look twice at them, cargo haulers and junkers that were beneath notice, beneath suspicion, beneath contempt. It was the most beautiful fleet Marcus had ever seen. The plan was simple because simple plans were the only kind that worked when everything was against you. The Velkari would be divided into small groups and loaded onto the 7 ships, each vessel taking a different route to a different destination. Hidden colonies and forgotten stations scattered across human space where refugees could disappear and never be found. But first, Marcus needed to blind the Dominion. He had studied the enemy ships in orbit, had analyzed their sensor arrays and communication systems with the same attention he gave to any machine, and he had found a weakness, a vulnerability that no one had thought to protect because no one had ever been crazy enough to try what Marcus was planning. The dome sat atop a network of natural energy, lines of power that ran through the Earth itself, and the Velkari had recognized this energy when they crashed here 60 years ago, had known it as something sacred, something that their technology could tap into and amplify. With Thessaly's help, Marcus had connected the stasis pod systems to this energy network, building a device that could release a massive electromagnetic pulse, a wave of power that would fry every sensor and communication system within 100 kilometers for 11 minutes. 11 minutes was all the fleet would need to scatter. The night before the escape, Marcus gathered the Velkari in the chamber and explained the plan, watching their faces shift through emotions he could not read, colors and lights that spoke of fear and hope and something else, something that looked almost like faith. "I do not understand," one of the younger Velkari said. "You are sacrificing yourself for us. You who only learned of our existence a few weeks ago, why would you do this?" Marcus thought of his grandmother, of the woman who had given up everything to protect strangers, who had spent 60 years alone in this mountain with only her duty and her love for company. "Because she did," he said, and his voice was quiet but steady. "My grandmother protected you for 60 years without asking for anything in return. She gave you her life, and if one human could do that alone, imagine what a whole species could do if we tried." The Velkari were silent, and in that silence Marcus saw something change in their eyes, something that went deeper than gratitude, deeper than hope. Thessaly stepped forward and placed her hand on Marcus's forehead, and warmth flowed through the connection between them, a warmth that felt like blessing and farewell and welcome all at once. "Your people are very young," she said, her voice resonating with power that made the air tremble, chaotic and broken and full of fire that burns without reason. "But perhaps that is what the universe needs, perhaps that is what we have been waiting for." She paused, and her eyes glowed with light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. "The prophecy spoke of the mender," she continued, "one who would come to repair what was broken, but we always thought it spoke of us, of our civilization, of our technology that needed to be saved, and we were wrong." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "The mender does not come to repair machines," Thessaly said. "The mender comes to repair hope, to remind us that kindness exists even in the darkest times, to prove that compassion can survive when everything else has burned away. And you, Marcus Reyes, grandson of Alina, you are the mender we have been waiting for." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and the moment passed, and there was work to be done. They loaded the Velkari onto the ships through a hidden tunnel that led from the chamber to a valley on the other side of the mountain, moving in darkness and silence, while the Dominion ships hung in the sky like watchful predators. 31 Velkari boarded the fleet, leaving behind 16 who were too weak to survive the journey, too fragile to be moved without killing them, and these 16 would stay with Marcus in the dome, waiting for whatever came next. Marcus watched the ships lift off one by one, their lights disappearing into the night sky, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time, something that burned in his chest and made his eyes water. He felt proud. And then he returned to the dome, to face the Dominion alone. The electromagnetic pulse lit up the night sky like a second sun, a wave of energy that raced outward from the mountain and crashed against the Dominion ships in orbit, frying their sensors and blinding their communications and leaving them deaf and helpless in the dark. 11 minutes and 14 seconds. That was how long the Dominion flagship hung paralyzed above the Earth, its crew scrambling to restore systems that had been burned out from the inside. And in those 11 minutes and 14 seconds, 7 ships carrying 31 Velkari scattered in 7 different directions, vanishing into the void before anyone could stop them. Marcus watched the chaos from a screen in the dome, counting the seconds as they ticked away, feeling each moment stretch into eternity, and when the last ship reported that it had reached safe distance, he allowed himself a single breath of relief. The fleet had escaped. His friends had done the impossible. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. The Dominion soldiers came at dawn, dozens of them in black armor, pouring out of shuttles that landed in the valley and marching up the mountain with weapons drawn and anger burning in their eyes. And Marcus stood in the entrance of the dome with his hands raised in surrender, waiting for them. Behind him, in the chamber below, the 16 remaining Velkari huddled together in fear, too weak to run, too sick to fight, dependent entirely on the human mechanic who had promised to protect them. The Dominion commander was a woman with cold eyes and a face that showed no emotion, and she looked at Marcus the way one might look at an insect that had somehow caused great inconvenience. "Where are they?" she demanded, her voice flat and hard. "Where are the aliens you helped escape?" "Gone," Marcus said, and he could not stop himself from smiling. "Scattered across the stars, hidden in places you will never find them, protected by people who hate you even more than I do." The commander struck him across the face, and Marcus tasted blood, but he did not stop smiling. They dragged him into the dome and down into the chamber, where the 16 Velkari waited with Thessaly at their center, her ancient eyes glowing with a light that made the soldiers hesitate. "These are the ones who remain," the commander said, her voice echoing through the vast space. "They will come with us, and you will tell us everything you know, or you will suffer in ways you cannot imagine." Marcus looked at Thessaly, and Thessaly looked back at him. And in that moment, something passed between them, a knowledge shared through the bond they had formed, a secret that Marcus had discovered in his grandmother's final journal. The dome sat atop a confluence of natural energies, a place where the fabric of reality was thin, where the Velkari ancestors had once created doorways to other realms, and that power still flowed through this mountain, waiting to be used. Alina had known about this power, but had never been able to access it. But Thessaly could, and the stasis technology that Marcus had connected to the ley lines could amplify her ability 1,000 times over. "I have one more secret to tell you," Marcus said to the commander, and his voice was calm even though his heart was racing. "My grandmother did not just hide these people, she prepared a way for them to escape, a way that you cannot follow, a way that will keep them safe forever." The commander opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Thessaly raised her hands and began to sing. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard, a melody that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the stone and the air and the very atoms of reality itself. And the lights in the chamber flared bright, brighter, brightest, until Marcus had to close his eyes against the brilliance. When he opened them again, the Velkari were gone. The stasis pods stood empty, their contents vanished, transported to a pocket dimension that their ancestors had created as a final refuge, a place beyond space and time where no enemy could ever reach them. The commander screamed in rage and turned on Marcus with murder in her eyes, but Marcus just stood there with tears streaming down his face, tears of joy and relief, and something that felt like victory. They arrested him, of course. They took him back to their ship and put him in a cell and asked him questions he could not answer, because he truly did not know where the Velkari had gone, only that they were safe, only that they were free. The trial was broadcast across human space, and it became a sensation, the story of the mechanic who had defied one of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy for beings he had only just met. Millions watched as Marcus stood before the judges and told them about his grandmother, about Alina Reyes, who had given 60 years of her life to protect refugees from a war that had nothing to do with humanity, about the choice she had made when she found frightened strangers in the mountains and decided to help them instead of turning them in. She could have been famous, Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. She could have been rich. She could have had everything the Dominion offered in exchange for the Velkari, but she chose compassion instead. She chose to be human in the best sense of the word. He paused and looked directly into the cameras that were broadcasting his words across the stars. "Humanity does not abandon people," he said. "That is not who we are, and if we forget that, if we let fear and greed turn us into something cold and cruel, then we do not deserve the stars we have reached." The charges were dropped under pressure from billions of humans who had heard his story and recognized something of themselves in his words, something they wanted to believe about their species. Marcus returned to the dome, now empty, and found one final gift waiting for him. A data crystal sat on his grandmother's desk, glowing with soft blue light, and when Marcus touched it, he felt Thessaly's presence in his mind, her voice whispering across the impossible distance between dimensions. "For you," she said, "for your people, the knowledge of the Velkari, our science and our art and our history, a gift from those you saved to those who will inherit the stars." In the years that followed, human engineers would unlock the secrets contained in that crystal, advancing their civilization by centuries, finding cures for diseases and solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable. And across the galaxy, the story of Marcus Reyes and Alina Reyes spread from world to world, the tale of the grandmother who sheltered dying strangers and the grandson who finished what she started. The Velkari had a new name for humanity now, a name whispered in their dimension of safety and peace, a name that carried with it the memory of two humans who had thrown themselves into fire for people they barely knew. They called them the Menders. And somewhere in the void between worlds, Thessaly smiled, because the prophecy had been fulfilled after all.